have been a home brewer going back to my teen years. I really started making beer at home when I was about 15, perhaps younger. I had a mother who would ferment anything that had sugar in it. She would ferment anything, and so it's a genetic thing. I picked up these fermentation habits from my darling mother, and started making beer as a very young guy, just fiddling around with fermentations of all sorts. So it was a hobby. It was a hobby that went on for many years, off and on. During university days, obviously, having your home brew saved a fair amount of money, and you could share it with your friends. The beers weren't particularly good, but the reality was that I was getting experience that I actually didn't know that I would turn into a business one day. So in the mid-'80s, 85, 86, a group of us were home brewing relatively seriously in Montreal West, and I was quite astounded at how much my friends enjoyed the beer. I said, man, this is surprising. I never really thought the beer was all that good, but they did. And I said, this is interesting. And we're talking about aha moments. At that particular instant, I said, maybe there's a business here. I didn't sort of follow up immediately on it, but the notion was placed in my mind that something was changing in the beer business. The Labatt and Molson's and the pale products that were available in the marketplace, something was changing. I was sort of beginning to read that, and perhaps there was an opportunity there. I was an administrator at Dawson. I was the Secretary General at that time, which has already been mentioned. In around 1987, I'd say February 87, we had a board meeting. At that particular point, Dawson wasn't the same beautiful campus that it is today. It was a college that was spread all over downtown Montreal, and we had great financial difficulties at that particular point, and a fair amount of internal struggles. And I was the Secretary General, and we were sitting there at a board meeting. We tried to levy some fees on students for various services. Students were, somewhat indignant, as we see students can be up to this day. And it was about midnight at this board meeting that had started at about 5, and I'm sitting there saying, another 25 years of this until I retire? That's what I'm going to do till I retire? I turned to a board member, Ann Unger, actually. I think some people in this room may know Ann. I said, Ann, 6 months, I'm out of here. At that particular moment, I made a decision to start a brewery in the heat of a really bad board meeting at Dawson College. So that's really how I got going. Skip along a bit, sell your house in Montreal West, buy a house out in Hudson so you can save some money. Because if you go bankrupt, put it in your wife's name, make sure that they can't take it from you, all those things that you worry about when you're an entrepreneur. And I was 40 at that point, 41 actually, so I wasn't 20. I was kind of throwing out job security and all those sorts of things and taking on the possibility of disaster. And as most of my compatriots and friends said, oh man, this is really crazy what you're doing, which in fact it was. But it really didn't hit me how the life of an entrepreneur was different than the life of an administrator at Dawson College until I was sitting in my office in Hudson in our house on the second floor, writing a check for $50,000 as a down payment on equipment for the brewery. I said, oh, man, I gotta be crazy. What am I doing? So all of you who are in the process of getting your business plan going, you may have a moment like that. You just have to work your way through it. I'm sure, Pino, you know that feeling. When you lay out that money and you don't know what's gonna happen, it's an aha moment, but not necessarily a happy, easy aha moment. It's like facing the reality of what you're moving into. So a few months later, with the assistance of John Aylen, actually, I ended up sitting behind a mirror watching focus groups. We had groups of people come in and discussing beer. And I sat there and we had enough money for 4 groups. So I listened to these folks talk about beer and their perceptions of beer. And we had a company that did the marketing research for us and actually prepared a report. Cost me $10,000, a lot of money back then. And they came up with a report. And the report basically said, brew something like this. Sounds good, eh? Smells vaguely like bubble, the stuff that kids make bubbles from. Relatively pale, sort of insipid stuff. That's what they said. Consumers in Quebec drink stuff like this. It's far too risky to try anything else. Now, I was in those focus groups, and I listened carefully, as those people did, as the professionals did. And what I heard was, no, you brew this. Full-bodied, dark, bitter, flavorful. That's what you brew. Now, why did I hear that? I had an aha moment that said this. They had a business moment that said that. And the difference was that what I heard consumers saying in those rooms, in French and in English, was, we like beer. There's lots of beer out there. If you're going to make another beer, don't make it the same as the other ones. That was the one message I heard. I think that the company that was working for us had a message, and that message was, be safe, protect yourself, don't be stupid. So we ended up actually coming up with a business concept that said, make products that the majority of beer consumers will not like. That was our business plan. Does that make any sense? No, but the instinct was, the aha in that was, we can't afford to fight the guys with the big bucks who can do all the marketing. We're never going to win that battle. The only way we'll win the battle is by having a product which is so different from what they have, is that it will attract the consumers that we need. And that's the base on which we're going to build our business. So we needed brand identity. And we thought of something local. So I was trying to incorporate actually the tower and the Atwater Market into our label. Well, anybody know what a doily is? If you try to get the clock tower and put it on this sort of background, which was based on sort of older Quebec beer labels, very simple, fundamental colors, very strong image, it looked like a doily, a thing that knit and you put on the table to put glasses on or something like that. And in John's office, they were working for another client that was a financial institution, and the financial institution had a couple of designs. One of the designs was a Jaguar. Do you remember this, John? And of course, back then, all of these things, they weren't on computer screens. They were sort of maquettes. They were handmade maquettes. So here we are, and I have my doily. They had the Jaguar and they had a Griffin. The financial company said, we're going for the Jaguar. And so we cut this Griffin out. I said, just cut the Griffin out. We cut the Griffin out of paper and we stuck it on this thing. And you notice the way the claws, can you see the claws hanging over the edge of the circle? Notice the tail hangs over the edge of the circle? We stuck that damn thing on, that logo, and I said at that moment, that's it. That's exactly what our logo's got to be. It's strong and it's powerful. It says tradition. It says time and agelessness. And we had that label has not been changed since that moment. Not in one way. That is still the label we use. So the instinct there was, and I think the aha was, you have to have something strong if you're in the small brewing business, because you're not going to compete on the television screen or heavy radio campaigns, so you have to find another way of doing it. So that's kind of what we used, and I think it's largely been successful. We also needed to get notoriety, needed people to know who we were. So there was a guy called Michael Jackson, not the Michael Jackson you're probably immediately thinking of, but he's a fellow who was a writer about beer. He was the beer hunter. Anybody who saw television programs back in the 90s. Anyway, the beer hunter shows were relatively ubiquitous for a while, and he is also a whiskey writer. Anyway, he was as well known a beer writer as anybody in the world at that point. And so Ellen and I, my wife, who's our brewmaster, we were over in England looking for some equipment. This was 1990, early 1990, basically year one of the business. So I took a six-pack. He lives in London, England, so We found his address Saturday morning. We sort of headed to his house, knocked on his door, and said, Michael, here's some St. Ambroise for you. There's this frumpy guy comes out with his big beard, and he says, St. Ambroise. He says, that's from Montreal. He'd already heard about our beer because of his network of beer spies that he had everywhere. But the review that he gave in the Michael Jackson annual book on beers was quoted everywhere. And instantly we began to build credibility. We also were constantly working on quality, but the beer had credibility. So that was another kind of insight that we understood is get your product out there, make sure it's known, make sure it's always best, have the guts to make sure that it's out there. And if you're in a situation where you're competing, make it compete and win the competitions constantly. And we did that for 25 years. And that, in fact, was Charlie Crawford, of course, has stolen that idea. He didn't steal that idea. But Charlie's been out there winning hundreds of medals with his products down from down in Fredericksburg with good reason. And that's the same basic notion. If you have something that it's a strange expression, don't hide your light under a bushel. What a strange expression. I'm not sure what it means. I guess people used to have bushels of apples and they'd have, anyway, I don't know what it means. But what it basically means, what I believe it means is be proud of what you do, get it out there, get it in people's faces. It makes a big, big difference to the success of your company. So something else that was very important, I think, was who is our consumer? I already told you that we knew that the great majority of fundamental consumers of beer were not our consumers. In fact, wine lovers were more our consumers. That's kind of funny. We are making beer for people who like wine, and most people who like beer wouldn't like our beer. By and large, that was it. So we had to figure out who they were. Well, I got my hands on a document. I think it came from John's office or somewhere, and I think it was called the Goldberg or Goldfarb Profiles. And it was a document that analyzed personality types in Canada, but in particular, it was of interest in Quebec. And in Quebec, there was, at that point, I assume it's the same today, there's a high proportion of early adopters of products, risk takers, people who are prepared to be adventuresome. Once if they try something that's risky and they like it, they support it, they bring it to their friends' homes, they support the brand, they effectively become a sales force. A large percentage of those people are in the arts. They're in the fine arts, they're in the theater world, they're musicians. And so we felt that a fundamental way to have access to that particular market, to get those people working with us, it was to support everything that happened in the arts that we possibly could, and we did that. Now, we didn't do Les Francfolies or the Jazz Festival or any of those things, but we did all the small festivals, and the brewery still is doing those things today. And I think that did that for 25 years, and I think to a large extent that allowed the company to grow. So it was an aha in the sense that all of these pieces attached themselves together, and they sort of worked. They worked the brand, they worked the business, they took it forward in a way that we wished it to go. I'm moving on pretty quickly here. And I'd say the biggest moment was at the last year, just before we sold. The Arcade Fire had a concert downtown. And you know, for those people who know Arcade Fire, they are not exactly big on supporting industry, although we've been working with them for quite a few years with Pop Montreal, going back to the beginning of Pop Montreal. And they did a free concert in downtown Montreal, and the only beer they had was St. Ambroise Pale Ale. And I think this is the only time I've ever seen them put a corporate logo up on their stage. Beside the stage, they had a big sort of LED light with the St. A logo. And that sort of shone for over 100,000 people that were in that square, and the only beer that was available was our beer. And I know for a fact that they turned down an offer of $60,000 cash and free beer from a Montreal big brewery. So that also says something about if you work and grow with people in your business, whatever the sort of grouping that you have, it will allow you to create alliances which in the long term, as you grow and they grow, Those alliances are really important, and I think that is an insight which it's easier to see after 25 years and looking back upon it than it was when I was in it. So, so I think that's that's. I had a bunch of other things, but they're less significant. One other thing I think is worthy of mentioning is everybody's in a business and they're starting it. Some people are in business now. Some people are at the point of starting it, just getting going. You're going to sell your business one day. I know it's kind of strange to talk about selling your business now, but you will sell your business, whether you sell it to your kids, or it's an intergenerational thing, or whatever. You're going to end up doing it. So I think that's not unimportant to consider. And we started thinking of that 15 years ago prior to selling the brewery.
You've had a lot of success with your company over the last 25 years. Can you please describe maybe one pivotal moment that could be, I don't like using the word failure, but something that you had invested in that, I'll say, blew up or didn't go as well as you would have liked it to, and then how you overcame that?
Yeah, we failed at lots of stuff. The thing about failure, by the way, for everybody here, failure is a huge value, has huge value to an organization, unless it kills you, in which case it's not good. But if you manage to survive your failures, generally your learnings are extraordinary. We came up with seasonal beers. You don't know if you remember this, John. We had a little 3-pack of seasonal beers, and we had 4 seasonal beers, and four times a year we would keep the outside box, which was beautiful, and just change the contents and put them in the market. The guys, and then we also had an open 6-pack. The guys in the trade hated the 6-pack, hated it, because you couldn't stack them. So, man, did we blow that. In the whole U.S. market's open 6-packs. Here it's all closed 6-packs, so they're stackable. The 3-pack thing, it was a pain in the ass to manage. We lost our shirt on it. We kept winning design awards for it. Great to have the design awards. We lost our shirts. But all 4 of the recipes that we made in those things are always recuperated and become beers. One of them is St. Ambroise Scotch Ale, St. Ambroise Pumpkin Ale, St. Ambroise Raspberry Ale, and St. Ambroise Apricot Ale, which is one of the biggest selling brands we have. So we went through the try and the failure. We were lucky enough to come out the other end and with products which in fact have stood the test of time in the beer marketplace. They're still very viable products today.
When you come across a business alliance, how do you know it's one that's worth nurturing over time?
Well, I think that, first of all, the relatively naive way I have always approached partnerships is that everybody's in it for the right reasons now. So I'm pretty open. I think I've always been open-minded, whether it's, I remember sitting down with the Pop Montreal thing as an example at the very beginning. Sat down with two or three young people. They were about, 20-ish, smart. I said, man, these kids are smart kids. And were smart kids, incredibly smart kids. And I said, I'm in for $5,000, which, upfront cash with no guarantees. So part of it is just a read. But lots of those things failed. A lot of the partnerships that we made across time didn't work out. But the ones that did had huge value. So I think and you try to align what you're doing. If you have aligned interests, what they're trying to do and what you're trying to do are aligned in some way, and you feel comfortable with the individuals, and you trust them, then by and large, you just move ahead on little chunks, little activities, and see how things work out. That's kind of how we did virtually all of the things all the partnerships we developed were really done that way, I'd say.